Earth is less violent today than it has been at any time in human history, and not just by a little bit, massively less violent than at any time in human history. Now, what's even more exciting, because when I discovered this book, I started doing a lot of research on this. What's even more exciting is it seems to be accelerating because crime rates are dropping all over the planet. In most of the planet, crime rates are dropping precipitously, and over the last 2 decades, they've dropped profoundly. Just in the last decade or so, the homicide rate in the United States has dropped by half, and it was already tremendously low, as far as like historical records were concerned. So there's something happening across the face of the planet, and nobody can explain it. In my Gospel of Science book, I have a quote from a professor who says, nobody understands why this is happening. It's happening, and some people will say. Now, Steven Pinker's book is very meticulous about going through history and explaining how social changes can address some of this stuff, and it's brilliant. I couldn't improve on that at all. But coming from the mind-body meditative angle and knowing what I know about the mind-body meditative practices and the effects that they have, the changing effects in the brain where they cause people to become more, their brains to become larger in the empathy and compassion areas and smaller in the fear and stress parts. For me, coming from that angle and seeing the rapid decline in our time, just in the last few decades, of violent crimes, I'm seeing it as something deeper than just sociological changes. I'm seeing it as something that's happening within the consciousness of human beings all over the planet, and I think that meditators are accelerating this, but it's not just affecting them, because as we just talked about, these studies show that these consciousness changes, our minds are like radios. I mean, they're brain waves.
Absolutely.
Don't just stop at the skull.
You said that's said very well. Absolutely true. Yep.
Yes. So they're rippling out. These waves are rippling out all through society.
What you said is, yes. I all of these things that you've talked about, you have delineated so well. I'm so very excited, that you were able to talk about this stuff, because I know it to be, but the way that you set it out there, and the way that you write, that's going to be a wonderful thing. And I certainly want to help get it in the hands of as many people as possible. You may know that I believe that we start out doing these body-mind disciplines for our own reasons, like the what's in it for me principle. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying that that it is, whether it's stress or whether it's I want to beautify my skin, or whether it's I want to meet somebody in Tai Chi class, or whatever it is, or it could be stop the neck pain. But once we come out on the other side, once we have gathered some understanding of this kind of discipline, once we have gathered some strength and stability through this learning process, then I believe we can decide to direct ourselves to take some kind of action, a global action, something that's not just about me. I want to get better. I want to do personal development. Me. I believe that yes, we may that may be our habit, but I do believe that because of the massive change or the elevation that we get from doing this stuff, we get ready, we get positioned to take some kind of action for world benefit.
Right.
So can you comment, this is my, and I think people are in line to make some type of peacemaking action or some kind of conflict resolution action. Please comment on that.
Well, I've actually been working on a new book for years, and I'm just a few months away from finishing it. It's called The Gospel of Science. And the way that the book opens is I remember many years ago when I was about, 6, 7 years old or something like that. And I was sitting in my Bible school class. My parents went to the Lutheran church, and so one summer I always liked Bible school because they gave us cookies and Kool-Aid. And so I remember I was sitting there in Bible school, and I was looking outside at the blue Kansas sky and those big puffy herds of those big puffy clouds going across the sky. And I remember hearing the teacher say that the gospel meant the good news, that it was good news. That's what it literally means.
Right.
And that really caught my attention because, who doesn't want to hear good news, right?
Yeah.
And so then my book, The Gospel of Science, it genesis from this, and it paints a picture of the future which runs quite counter to the way that we've been acculturated to think of the future. An alarming number of people think that the future is very dismal. But the concept and the premise of my book is that it's extremely exciting, and what I explained in there is that this good news is actually coming from science, and the science that I've been discovering over the last couple of decades is amazingly similar to the same good news that I was getting in my Sunday school classes and Bible school classes, more than you would ever think. And so I'll explain what I'm talking about here. What's happening is that mind-body practices and meditative practices are expanding across the planet at an earth-shattering speed. ABC World News reported that 40% of Americans had turned to alternative and complementary medicine and primarily meditation. Now, what's significant about that is that over the last decades, I've immersed myself in collecting research, like you mentioned before, about mind-body practices and consciousness, and it's extremely exciting. What they've found in studies is that when people practice meditation on a regular basis, and when I say meditation, I'm talking about going into the brainwave alpha state, the alpha state brainwave state. That's indicative of a meditative state. There's a lot of different meditative ways to get there, but the way that you know you're there is when the brain goes into the alpha wave state, and it's that state where you kind of surrender and you start to kind of drift and lose your sense of self. You don't stay there all the time when you're meditating, but you drift into it from time to time.
Right.
And it has all these healing benefits. And so the reason it's spreading not only throughout the United States but around the planet so rapidly, because my global work with teachers all over the planet has shown me this is a global phenomenon. It's just not in the U.S. like ABC World News had reported. But what they're finding in this research is that most of the people are going to these mind-body meditative techniques because of health research, medical research that they're reading about it and health issues. But the side effect that they're finding is that when people meditate on a regular basis, it increases the empathy and compassion parts of their brain. It actually physically increases the size of the empathy and compassion parts of the brain, and it shrinks the fear and stress parts of the brain. And so when people meditate, they're actually transforming themselves into more humane, empathetic, and compassionate beings. And that's what all the major religions of the world, that's the root of all the major religions of the world. Now, they can get distorted and twisted and bent in a lot of different ways, which they have from time to time. I mean, we have the Dark Ages and the Inquisitions and different things around the planet. But the essential kernel of inspiration for all these religions was compassion and empathy for your fellow human being. And so science is starting to spread meditative technologies around the planet at a mind-numbing, that's a poor word, but
that's great. I love it.
Incredibly accelerated,
yeah,
an accelerated pace. And what's happening is hundreds of millions of people around the planet are growing the empathy and compassion parts of their brain and shrinking the fear, stress parts of their brain. And so what we're talking about is we are talking about a global transformation that is more massive and altering than anything in history. The advent of democratic society, the advent of the nuclear age, anything, because we're talking about a mass of people around the planet that are starting to see the world in a whole new way, and at a time when it's most absolutely needed, because the population of the planet's quadrupled in our lifetime. No generation in the history of humanity has incurred the kind of stress that we're incurring as the planet gets more crowded, and so that's driving people more to meditation too. That stress, and what the meditation effect is it's changing our brain function in a way so that we are able to connect with other human beings in a more empathetic and compassionate way at a time when it absolutely most needed in the whole history of the human race. I think it's really amazing when you start to think about this, because this stuff really just started to spread planet-wide when the Beatles went to hang out with the Maharishi in India. That's really the spark that kind of
that was it.
set
Yeah,
a lot of
absolutely.
this in motion. So where we're going to be in 20 years is going to depend on the synaptic electrical firing that's going on within human consciousness right now. And so as mind-body tools are expanded across the planet through corporate wellness and through healthcare and everything, what's happening is that there's epiphanies, there's these awakenings that are starting to bubble through the consciousness of individual minds all over the planet. And now what's exciting about that, beyond that, is that I did a presentation for Folsom Prison, maximum security prison, the one that Johnny Cash played at in California.
Yeah.
And when I went there, I thought that I was going to be introducing them to Tai Chi and Qigong meditation. But that wasn't the case. Judith Trethway and an inmate there named Jim, they had actually started a Tai Chi Cha program 2 years before. So they'd been practicing mind-body meditation for 2 years. And so when I went through all the slamming steel doors, and it gets pretty intense. And you have to sign a waiver saying if you get taken as a hostage, they won't negotiate for your release.
Right.
So anyway, I got all the way into the middle of the prison, and there's a chapel in the middle of the prison, and I walked in there, and in the prison it's all segregated. It's like whites hang out with whites, blacks hang out with blacks, Hispanics hang out with Hispanics, and and there's a lot of conflicts that happen between those groups.
Yeah.
And you have to go in. Like if you're white, you got to hang out with white guys, even if you don't. Even if you're an egalitarian human being, if you want to survive, you got to do that.
Right.
But when I got into the chapel where the Tai Chi Qigong meditation group was, it was all integrated. There were Native Americans in there were Hispanics, there were blacks, there were whites, there was everything.
Excellent,
and they were
excellent.
all doing, they were all flowing through these Tai Chi Cha, and some of them were sitting in the pews and they were meditating, and I found out they'd been doing this for 2 years. And this inmate named Jim, after it was over, I started talking to him, and I communicated with him for quite a while after that. And he had kept statistics over these 2 years. And what they found was that not only did the recidivism rate and the behavioral incident rate improve dramatically for the people in the Tai Chi and Qigong meditation group, but they improved for the whole prison over these 2 years.
Right.
And so that jived with other research that I'd been collecting. There was a fairly well-known study in Washington, D.C., where the TM Foundation had brought in meditators. They collaborated with the police chief of the Washington, D.C. Police Department, this crime statistics department, and some universities. And they told them, we want to bring in a certain number of meditators, and we're planning on a result being that your crime rate will drop by, I think it was like 25% or something like that. And so anyway, the police chief laughed, and he goes, you'll do that if there's a blizzard in August, because that's when they were going to do it. And so anyway, he agreed, and the crime statistics department worked with him. And what was amazing was that not only did they bring down the HRI, which is homicides rates and assaults rate, for that percentage that they had predicted that they would, but they actually dropped it a little bit more than they had predicted that they would. Now, the thing that was really amazing about it was they didn't bring all the meditators in at once. They brought them in progressively. And if you look at the lines on the chart, the drop in crime matches the increase in the meditators coming into the city.
No doubt. That's fantastic. I'm not surprised. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So what's happening all over the planet with meditation being spread all over the planet is it's not only affecting the people that are doing it, but it's affecting the population around those.
Absolutely,
absolutely. And I don't know if we're going to have time later, but I want to talk about a book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, because everybody needs to read it, because this is part of my Gospel of Science book as well, because what it shows is that the planet Earth is less violent today than at any time in history, and I know that'll stun a lot of people, so I'll explain it more if we have more time later.
Yeah, well, you know what? Why don't you talk about it? Give us the title again. I mean, we're at the end. This is what I have planned. We're at the end.
Diane, Bill, it's Steve. We can add some time to this, so if Bill wants to discuss that, I certainly say let's
do it. Excellent. Okay, well, great. Yeah, we can. I have just my ending and some questions that people have given to me. So please, give us the name of that book again and talk about it.
Okay. Yeah, it's called The Better Angels. It's called The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker. Steven Pinker is a Harvard psychologist, and what he did is it's a huge book, but I highly recommend it. It'll change the way you see the world. And what he did was he compiled all the statistical data from the earliest history of humanity, because they have all these forensic records of these people that you see in the natural history museums, the ancient primordial human beings, and so anyway, and when you look at all this data in totality, what you find is that the planet, like I said, the planet Earth is less violent today than it has been at any time in human history, and not just by a little bit, massively less violent than any time in human history. Now, what's even more exciting, because when I discovered this book, I started doing a lot of research on this. What's even more exciting is it seems to be accelerating, because crime rates are dropping all over the planet. In most of the planet, crime rates are dropping precipitously, and over the last 2 decades, they've dropped profoundly. Just in the last decade or so, the homicide rate in the United States has dropped by half, and it was already tremendously low, as far as like historical records were concerned. So there's something happening across the face of the planet, and nobody can explain it. In my Gospel of Science book, I have a quote from a professor who says, nobody understands why this is happening. It's happening, and some people will say. Now, Steven Pinker's book is very meticulous about going through history and explaining how social changes can address some of this stuff, and it's brilliant. I couldn't improve on that at all. But coming from the mind-body meditative angle and knowing what I know about the mind-body meditative practices and the effects that they have, the changing effects in the brain where they cause people to become more, their brains to become larger in the empathy and compassion areas and smaller in the fear and stress parts. For me, coming from that angle and seeing the rapid decline in our time, just in the last few decades, of violent crimes, I'm seeing it as something deeper than just sociological changes. I'm seeing it as something that's happening within the consciousness of human beings all over the planet, and I think that meditators are accelerating this, but it's not just affecting them, because as we just talked about, these studies show that these consciousness changes our minds are like radios. I mean, they're brain waves.
Absolutely.
Don't just stop at the skull.
You said said very well. Absolutely true. Yeah.
Yes. So they're rippling out. These waves are rippling out all through society.
What you said is, yes. I all of these things that you've talked about, you have delineated so well. I'm so very excited, that you were able to talk about this stuff, because I know it to be, but the way that you set it out there, and the way that you write, that's going to be a wonderful thing. And I certainly want to help get it in the hands of as many people as possible.